Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage. Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage. And someone will say his career can never be saved. Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage.
Welcome to Just Nicolas Cage, where I very slowly work my way through Nicolas Cage's filmography. And today I'm talking about the 2009 movie Knowing. In Knowing, Nicolas Cage plays an astrophysics professor, and one day his son takes home a piece of paper with a bunch of numbers on it that had been buried in a time capsule 50 years ago. Nick Cage notices that the numbers on the paper contain details about major disasters that occurred over the last 5 decades. And there's also 3 dates on there that haven't happened yet. So Nick Cage has to try to warn everybody about these impending disasters before it's too late. So this movie is quite a mix of different genres. You've got a real blend of elements here. There's mystery/thriller aspects, there's drama, sci-fi, and horror, as well as disaster movie elements. There's also seemingly contrasting ideologies of science, numerology, religion, and the supernatural all coexisting together. And fittingly, the responses to the movie are kind of divided. A large amount of people hated it when it first came out, but from what I've seen online, it does have its supporters, and Roger Ebert called it among the best science fiction films he's ever seen. As for me, I have some pretty mixed feelings, so let's get into it. So right off the bat, I think the premise of somebody finding a code from 50 years ago that contains information about past and future disasters is actually a pretty good setup for a movie. But the way Nicolas Cage's character gets involved with that was pretty sloppy writing, I thought. Cage's character puts a drink down and it leaves a ring around a seemingly random bunch of numbers, which randomly catches his eye, and then he writes down a random line of those numbers, which just so happens to contain the date of the September 11th attack and the death toll. But I don't really get why he singled out that specific string of numbers in the first place, because I don't think he even initially made the connection of 9/11, and there's loads of other numbers in the ring there that his eyes could have gone to. I know that a big theme in the movie is the idea that what we think is random and coincidence is actually preordained, but it just feels like a forced and messy way to start Nicolas Cage's character down the rabbit hole. But it does lead to a moment where Nicolas Cage's character types in 9/11 into a search engine, and I was half expecting it to pop up with a page that said, like, here's some movies about 9/11, and the movie World Trade Center comes up, and Nicolas Cage would be like, wait, that looks just like me.
What the hell is this?
The whole disaster element to the film is definitely its strongest suit, in my opinion. There are some great set pieces involving planes, trains, and automobiles. The standout to me by far is the plane crash scene, where Nicolas Cage's character witnesses a plane crash and the camera follows him trying to save the passengers from the wreckage. And it's legitimately really well done. It's all one take as far as I can tell, and the camera work is excellent in this sequence. It's just the right amount of shaky to convey that visceral feeling that you're in the thick of it. But it's not too shaky that it gets distracting, which is very important. And the scene really captures that realistic helplessness that you probably would feel in a situation like this. You'd like to think that you'd be pulling people to safety like an action hero, but it probably would be more like this, where you're just impotently watching people burning alive. At one point, somebody goes running past Nicolas Cage while on fire, and all Nicolas Cage does is just goes, "Hey." And I've seen people make fun of that part online, but if somebody sprints past you while on fire, what can you really do except yell, "Hey, come back and stop being on fire"? It really is a great scene though, but there's one thing that holds it back, and that's a glaring continuity error. So before the plane crashes, Nicolas Cage is on the motorway talking to a police officer, and then we see the policeman be visibly horrified as he sees something directly behind Nicolas Cage and runs away. And we can clearly see that Nicolas Cage was standing with his back to these cars. And then he turns around and looks at something shocking, which obviously suggests that something was coming from this direction, right? And then the camera pans around and we see that what they were looking at was a low-flying plane, but it's clearly coming from this direction, which was behind the policeman and way off to his right, so what the hell was he looking at behind Nicolas Cage?
Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunder.
The train crash scene in the movie is also pretty great too, where a train derails and smashes through the platform into a bunch of civilians. I've seen it pointed out that with the way that kinetic energy and friction works, there's no way that the train would actually be going that fast, especially after plowing through all that concrete. But it's definitely a shocking sequence in terms of the sheer destruction. It's like something out of Final Destination. There's even a brief POV shot of people getting mowed down by the train, which almost felt like a PG-13 version of that infamous train scene from Invincible. Less effective though is the weird burning animals dream sequence scene, which might have been impactful if it wasn't for the awful CGI of the flaming moose, and it just comes off as kinda goofy. But when the crazy stuff isn't happening in the movie, it can be a bit of a slog. It falls into a bit of a repetitive quality of Nicolas Cage deciphering things but people don't believe him, and the movie is plagued with a ton of repetitive corny horror tropes and cliches. You've got the creepy whispering, creepy kid writing mysterious stuff, and you got people that are there in the distance 1 second and gone in the next. Those kind of things are pretty played out to me, and they're all big recurring parts of the movie. There's a couple of moments that I know for sure would have creeped me out if I saw this movie when I was younger, but as a whole I thought the attempts at horror were pretty lame. So let's talk about the cast and characters, starting with my boy Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage's character is actually quite interesting. The last few characters he's played at this point have been kind of blank slates that you don't really know much about. But here we do know a decent bit about his backstory. He's from a religious family and his father was a pastor, but after Nicolas Cage's character's wife died, he came to the conclusion that there's no grand meaning or real purpose in life, and that shit just happens. So him being the one that's actually uncovering evidence that life events are preordained is a pretty interesting dynamic, but I don't really think they did enough with it. And the conclusion of his arc was not particularly satisfying to me. But I think Nicolas Cage's performance is fairly decent here. I've seen some criticisms of it, but I thought he was fine. He does emote a lot more than in the last few movies I've covered. He plays it somberly for the most part, but he does have a couple of little outbursts.
You stay away from us, you hear? You want some of this?
And he nails a few of the dramatic moments. He does seem to spend a large chunk of this movie running a la Tom Cruise. And I do think that there's some moments where he underplays it a bit too much. Like, it did make me chuckle that his reaction to discovering that the document from the 1950s contains information about 9/11 is him going, "Come on."
Come on.
And because of the situation his character is in, I really think that certain scenes should have called for a Wicker Man level of Nicolas Cage energy. Like this scene where Cage knows that a disaster is about to happen in the area and nobody's listening, and he just plays it fairly calmly.
Excuse me?
Said, why hasn't this intersection been sealed off? Did you get the tip off about the attack?
When you have Nicolas Cage in a role like that, it feels like a missed opportunity for him not to be like, seal off the intersection or we're all gonna die! As for the rest of the supporting cast, there's no real standouts. Rose Byrne does a good job, but I wish she was utilized a bit better. I think her character was kind of squandered. Ben Mendelsohn plays Nicolas Cage's work colleague, and his role in the movie is meant to be the initial skeptic who disputes Nicolas Cage's claims. But he's a pretty unlikable, poorly written character. I mean, one of his first lines is him talking about his sister-in-law's double D breasts, so it's kind of hard to take him seriously after that. And look, it's a wild Liam Hemsworth.
Tell me something about the sun.
It's hot.
Hey, that's Nicolas Cage's line from his last movie.
It's, hot.
Okay, so I have to talk about the ending of this movie because it's a doozy and I have a lot to say about it. So spoiler alert if you haven't seen the movie knowing. Okay, so Nick Cage finds out that the final disaster date from the time capsule refers to everybody else, which suggests that the world is about to end. And then Nick Cage finds these angel alien beings in the woods, and he lets them take his son and Rose Byrne's daughter in a spaceship thing and they fly off the Earth, leaving Nicolas Cage and the rest of humanity to get vaporized by a solar flare. And then we see the kids on another planet or plane of existence, Garden of Eden type place, and then the movie ends.
What the hell is that?
I will say that I fully commend the movie for having the balls to go through with that out there ending. I will admit that the moments leading up to the Earth's destruction at the end of Knowing are genuinely quite striking and heavy hitting. And as out of left field as Angel showing up in a spaceship seems on paper, I can't say that they didn't foreshadow some of it. At one point the characters find a copy of an engraving of Ezekiel's chariot vision, which depicts a chariot that kind of looks like the spacecraft thing at the end. And in the Bible verse that the engraving depicts, Ezekiel mentions 4 beings that look like people but have wings. And also obviously in terms of biblical reference, there's the tree of knowledge looking thing at the end. I think they slightly held back from making the ending go fully overtly Christian, but you can tell what they were going for. I found a quote from the director of Knowing, Alex Proyas, who said that he intended Knowing's ending to be a kinda sorta prequel to his film Dark City. I watched Dark City for the first time recently, and I guess that kinda sorta maybe makes sense. But it also kind of sort of raises a whole bunch of questions about both movies. Like, does that mean that the angels in Knowing are the bald guys from Dark City? But all of that being said, I don't like the ending of this movie. Watching that bonkers conclusion actually play out as the payoff to a 2-hour-long movie that I tried to sink emotional investment into just left me with a deeply unsatisfied feeling. So the world ends, everybody dies, and there's magical angelic aliens. Alright, okay, what am I meant to do with that? I think the feeling of futility and inevitability against the will of the universe is kind of the whole point of the movie. But it also makes the whole movie feel kind of pointless. Pretty much everything that the protagonist did was a waste of time. I know there's meant to be an optimistic feeling of rebirth at the end with the kids, but the movie left me feeling depressed and kind of empty. And maybe that was the intention, but the ending just didn't work for me. So overall, I can see why somebody would like this movie. There's definitely some pretty good concepts in there. The build-up is done quite well. It's directed competently for the most part, and it has a handful of very well executed scenes. But I just can't call it a good movie as a whole. It's a lot dumber than it thinks it is, but not in the fun way. There's big sections of the movie that kind of drag. And the ending, as big and crazy as it is, just kind of soured the overall experience for me and left me feeling like I'd wasted my time. But if you like the ending of this movie, I would genuinely like to hear your interpretation of it in the comments. So the next movie Nicolas Cage was in was G-Force. So until then, thanks for watching.